That's right. We're reviewing Jules. Jules is a sci-fi comedy movie about old people. The plot synopsis can be described as there is a lonely old man, spaceship crashes into his backyard, and this forces him to bond with his neighbors. So, let's get into talking about that cast of characters, this world that's been set up, and talk about our feelings. So, the core cast of this is these four characters plus another character called Jess, who wasn't in this picture, so they didn't get a reference, and they are a secondary character. They do undergo their own arc, and I'll discuss that a little bit when I'm discussing Milton separately from this whole group here. But essentially, the main cast of this is retirees who don't have families, or if they do have families, they are not as active in their lives as they would want their children and their grandchildren to be. They are kind of separated from their families. Milton probably is the person who sees his grandkids the most, and that his grandkid is the Jess character I referenced earlier, and that's not a very put together relationship. Joyce has her cat as her closest familiar relation, owner pet. So they're just kind of isolated from society. They're bored. They don't really have a place to be anymore. They've gone past what is expected of a person to really do, like, in terms of work. So now they're just retirees, and they don't have that, like, forward momentum that they want. So they're doing, like, the old person board things. They're playing bingo on the weekends. They're going to city board meetings and discussing really minor issues week after week after week. In the opening scene of this movie is Milton going in and going to, like, well, I don't like the name of our city. The name of the city, not the name of the city, it's the city slogan. A good place to call home. I don't like this slogan because a good place to call home is confusing. Is it a good place to call your home, or is it a good place to call your home, as in phone your home, as in to dial your home phone number? I think this is confusing, and should change to be something along the lines of a good place to say that your home is located, or something along those lines. And the bit is he has that, and it's like there's a street crossing that he wants added, and the bit escalates and escalates with him going back and, like, repeating the same thing. And eventually when Jules comes onto the scene, he's like, he does this speech about the town slogan and the crosswalk, and he's like, also, an alien spaceship crashed in my backyard and ruined my petunias. Which is a very funny little twist. It's a very funny movie. A lot of gags in that kind of vein where it's like, oh, they're just kind of, like, very calm about this, or oh, they're very, like, crazed about this, and then they adjust and they get to be this very calm mind state about the situation they're in. And all of these characters do have their own, like, versions of that going into town and giving that, like, prepared speech, and it's this highly repetitive lifestyle that they've all kind of fallen into. So let's go over Milton's life a little bit more in depth, separate from, like, this cast of characters. We might return to this. Milton is undergoing a few struggles during this movie. The first one is his struggle with his daughter, Jess. He also has a son who he's been estranged from. They no longer talk on calls. They've moved away to a different coast. They aren't in his life anymore. So his son, moot point for him. And then he has Jess, who is in town, but she's busy with work. She's very proactive, and she's a bit pushy on his other main issue that he has going on for himself throughout the movie. And that is, he has Alzheimer's or dementia in the early stages. He's starting to have issues with memory. He's placing cans of beans where they don't belong. He's very clearly at that point where it's like, I know I'm fading. I don't want to admit it to myself, though. And one of his core arcs is coming to understand and accept that. And accept that he needs to have his family to lean on as he goes through this medical discovery that he is undergoing. And the way Jules interacts with this is Jules acts as like the companion that he didn't really have at the start of this movie. Jess is too busy working and isn't really interested in putting down the time to like hang out with Milton. So when Jules comes on to the scene, it's, oh, I can talk to this person, and they're not judgmental. They just draw me pictures of cats. And that's something that Milton really enjoys. It's a consistent form of companionship, and one that isn't concerned for him like Jess is. He doesn't like the feeling of pressure that comes from Jess being like, you need to go to the doctor's appointment. Hey, you need to get your bills paid, blah, 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 blah. Hey, are you feeling okay? It's a pressure on him that he doesn't know how to deal with. And Jules is kind of an antithesis to that, where it's like, it's a pressure on him, but he can just be very calm, and Jules will work themselves out. So it's a dynamic that he appreciates, to the point where at the end of the movie, he's like, can I go with you to space, spaceman? And that's like, it's a tempting fantasy of, I might have issues, but I can ignore them, I can run. And those issues will be, like, just passively accepted by my companions. And there's going to be no pressure on me to see what I can do. And that's just not something that's realistic. While we're here, I guess I'll go over Jess, because I don't have a separate slide for her. Jess's arc is basically, it goes from ignoring her dad to, like, okay, I know there's pressure on him. I should, be a daughter. I should spend a day with him. I should take him to his favorite restaurant and get him the same meal every week. That sort of thing. The standard ways you show appreciation to your grandparents. Or your like, elderly parents. Anyways, going on to the other side characters. Sandy and Joyce. So Sandy's plot during this is basically her loneliness. She's even more isolated than Milton is. She has a good relationship with her granddaughter, but her granddaughter is, once again, on another coast. So she can't really be, like, seeing her granddaughter. Milton at least sees his granddaughter a few times a month when she comes over to help him pay bills and manage that sort of thing. Sandy doesn't have that. Sandy is painfully alone throughout this movie. Up until the point where she comes into, like, the fold with Milton and Jules. She's isolated. Her thing that she does at the town meetings is she is trying to start, like, an older, younger club where she's meeting with the youth and doing, like, a mentorship program. But this is something that shows no interest throughout the movie. The town board is like, oh, that's so cute. She doesn't find any members. The only thing that really goes well for her throughout the whole process of this is she decides to use Milton's printer, because after Milton does this whole, the spaceship crashed in my backyard and destroyed my petunias bit, there's like a concern from the other people who would attend this town meeting, like, is Milton finally losing it? Like, he's getting up there in age, Those issues occur. So Sandy attempts to go there, and she learns about Jules, and she winds up befriending Jules. The subplot with the mentorship program does not go away at that point, but it definitely plays a much smaller part in the movie. once she has, like, the companionship from Milton and Jules. And she really comes to accept, I'm old, but there's other old people here that I can socialize with. And yeah, meeting new young people would be fun and interesting, but it's not something that I necessarily need to do right now. It's not my... It shouldn't be my main form of socialization. I should be doing it for... Whereas previously it was like, oh, she's just looking for somebody to talk to. And the need for, like, somebody to talk to her is, like, a core theme of this movie. Is, like, you shouldn't just ignore these old people because they're old and retired. They're not cats. And I guess it's a good point to springboard into Joyce. Now, if Sandy is more isolated than Milton, Joyce is more isolated than Sandy. Joyce is, at the start of this movie, a sort of bully character. More isolated than anything. Like, she's a snoop, but who does she snoop to? She makes snarky remarks about others, but nobody listens. She is without contact. She has, like, a grandiose vision of herself, but nobody to see it. And this is something that, like, influences her character throughout the movie. She really has one connection, and that is her cat. Her cat is also very painfully old. Blind, can't walk on their own. Basically, the cat, if you took it to the vet, they'd say, you should put this down, they're suffering. So when she gets brought into the fold, inevitably, with Jules, as Sandy and Milton, she takes to it really well. And while Milton and Sandy reminisce on their children and their love for their children and the mistakes they've made and the mistakes that they think their children are making, Joyce reminisces on her own past. She thinks back to the days when she was the hot item, when she could go into the city and drink and dine and have all the attention and affection she wanted. She could party, she could be the center of attention whenever she wanted to. And that's a fantasy for her, because now that she's elderly, she's moved out of the city and she's in the countryside, nobody cares about her. She's isolated. It's the cat and the inkling of attention that she can get from the city board whenever she attends the meetings. I don't even remember if she had, like, a specific thing she went up and did at the city board. It's nothing. It's an attempt to be the center of attention that goes nowhere because there's no meaningful connection that she's trying to make at that point in time. She winds up feeling like the saddest character of these three, despite probably undergoing the least amount of tragedy. Because she never had anything to lose. But she managed to lose it all. So she's there and she basically clings to the companionship of her cat. She's the one who is active with Jules. She's the one who figures out what Jules wants. While Milton really only was serving apples and water to Jules, Joyce comes in and, desperate for that connection, asks what Jules wants. And they do find an answer, and that's where the core plot of this movie is. I'm not going to go into spoilers for this movie, because this is a movie I think you should go see. So yeah, that's the brief overview of those two characters. Let's move on to, like, some core themes. Aging gracefully is one of the main themes of this. This is Milton's character arc, is coming to terms with his dementia, and accepting that I'm not as young as I used to be. I do need to lean on Jess more. Accepting death is also core to Milton's character arc, although it's important to everyone's arc in this movie. This is like the characters having that realization, we're old, our time is coming. This is most felt heavily by Milton, who knows that he's not going to be able to, like, have the mental facilities to fully comprehend what's going on. The value of friends and family. All of these characters start out estranged from their families, lacking friends, isolated. And throughout the course of the movie, Jules brings them together and unites them. Intergenerational bonding. Obviously, you have Milton reforging his relationship with his daughter Jess. You have Sandy realizing that she doesn't need desperately to have those bonds, but having those bonds is not in and of itself a bad thing. And then with Joyce, it's really coming to terms with, I need to bond with people of my own generation, and maybe I'll bond with some of the younger people too, because they're going to have their friendships who are younger, but it's not really a theme for Joyce in the same way. So I think that's good thoughts on this movie. I'm sorry I've been pretty vague. This is more so like, go see this movie. It's really good. I think it tells a beautiful story with its themes. I think it's pretty funny for what it is. I do recommend this movie, especially if you're like getting up in the years. I don't think like an 18-year-old would get the same value out of this as like a 30-year-old. I think the older you are, the better this movie is going to be for you. But I don't think this movie is going to be bad even if you're on the younger side. And if you're dealing with like grandparents who have this, I think that kind of like negates those issues. Like you have a grandparent who's like struggled through dementia, struggled through Alzheimer's. I could see this movie hitting like an even greater emotional chord with you.